Novus Chat.
Hi everyone, I'm Bill Hagen, founder of Novus NY. And in this channel, we talk with professional musicians that have worked here in New York City. And we try to figure out some inside information about their careers and their experiences. And we try to do this in a way that we are chatting and it's pretty conversational. And we invite you and whoever is watching this video now to share your opinions on the comments or to share this video, and hopefully you're gonna have good takes from this channel. So without further ado, I have a special guest today. Obviously all of my guests are special because they are all my friends and they are all talented musicians, but this one is special in a different way because in 2019 I recorded my first EP called Songs of Sorrow. You can Google it and you can find it on Spotify, all those streaming platforms. And I hired 15 singers to sing with me, and I hired a conductor and everything, and she was one of the singers. And I'm so happy because the first time that I heard her voice, like as a soloist, I was singing at National Chorale, which is a choir, it's a professional choir based here in New York City. And she was singing together with me at the choir, and she had a solo part. And I didn't hear the solo part before. And when we had the dress rehearsal at Lincoln Center, I heard her beautiful voice and it was amazing. And I was like, oh, I wish she could sing one of my pieces and all of that. And I had the chance to invite her to participate on my EP. And she gladly accepted and she did a great job. Obviously, she's not soloing anything, but she's singing together with the alto part, with the alto section. And I am so glad that we have here Gina Morgano. How are you doing, Gina?
Hi, Bill. I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, of course. The pleasure is all mine. I'm so grateful that we are having this conversation. And without further ado, let's get into it. So, some people don't know you yet, and I would like you to sell your fish. Sell your fish is like a Portuguese expression that we have that we are trying to when people try to sell their products, sell their services, and talk about themselves. So tell us who you are and what you do.
Yes. Well, I have never heard that expression, sell your fish, so I love it. I'm going to borrow it. I am a singer, as you mentioned. I am
Mhm.
also a voice teacher. I produce my own concerts as well. And I'm really passionate about helping people to find their voice and to contribute the best of their creativity to the world.
Wow, that's good. Good answer. Oh my goodness, short and sweet. I love that. And tell me one other thing, Gina. When you move, are you originally from New York or you're from elsewhere and you moved to New York and stayed here for a couple years? What's your background?
Yes. So I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And then I went to school in Evanston outside of Chicago and then in San Francisco. And then I moved to New York and I was there for almost 8 years until the pandemic. And now I'm actually back in Pittsburgh, but going back and forth a bit to New York.
Oh, that's good. So you're back at your hometown?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes,
that's
I
good.
am.
How does that feel like living in New York City and then coming back to your hometown? Like, could you describe the feelings and did you feel like your hometown changed since you left and when you came back, like you saw something different, or it's exactly the same, like the people are the same? Tell us about your experience about that.
That's a great question because I never expected to move back.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, it's the same. I've been very, very grateful for this time with my family. I've been grateful, especially the past 2 years, for having the space. Obviously, New York is very condensed together.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then it's also been challenging in some ways because I built a life that I loved in New York, and New York always has so much going on, and Pittsburgh has a lot, but it's a very different energy, and there are pros and cons to both.
Good, good. So I am interested on knowing about the pros and cons to both because I feel like our audience would appreciate that kind of experience because a lot of people I've heard some statistics. I don't know if they are correct because I'm lazy. I'm not gonna go look it up because I have other things to do. I'm just being completely honest. But I heard that most people that live in New York City, they are not from here, and that's exactly my case, and that's your case as well because you are from Pittsburgh. But tell me, like, during the period that you were living in New York City, how long you lived in New York City, for how many years?
It was almost 8 years. I moved there in October of 2012, and then I
Mhm.
moved out March 16th of 2020.
Yes, good, good. In those 8 years, tell me one thing good and one thing not so good about what you experienced during those 8 years working and living in New York City.
Sure, so many things. It's hard to pick one. I will say that my favorite thing about New York is the arts community. There is no place in the world that has such a high number of extraordinary musicians and theater artists all coming together in this small little town. I mean, New York's a big city, but it's still small when you think of the whole world. And having that concentration of people and that high caliber of music making was so inspiring every single day. That was by far my favorite thing about the city.
Hmm.
And then my least favorite thing about the city, the not so great thing, well, two things come to mind. The
Hmm.
first is the flip side of that. There are so many people. And it is challenging. Everybody is going after the same jobs. There are more people than there are job opportunities. And there are so many people just on the subway and in the grocery stores. And so then my other part of the least favorite is just the day to day living of the mundane things like getting your groceries, like traveling from place to place. Those things can be very, very draining in a way that
Hmm.
they aren't in smaller cities or more suburban areas.
And just out of curiosity, how big is Pittsburgh in terms of population and size in comparison to New York? I know that it's pretty smaller, but how much smaller? Give me some numbers if you know them.
I don't know the current numbers, but it's a
Hmm.
medium-sized city. So
Hmm.
it's not super small, but it's not like your LA, your Chicago, your Washington, D.C., or New York.
Oh, I see. I see. And another question that I have, like among those 8 years that you lived and worked here in New York City, tell me how did you get your first gig? Like, first, actually, let me rephrase that. These are two questions. The first question, what was your motivation to move to New York City? This is the first question. And second, what was your first gig as a musician here in New York City? Tell us about it.
Okay, so I always knew that I wanted to live in New York at some point in my life. I grew up fascinated with New York before I ever visited, and I went for the first time on a 24-hour trip when I was 14 years old, and I fell in love with the city, and I always knew I'd want to move there. Then I went to college at Northwestern, and I was part of the music theater program there. I was a classical voice major, but the music theater program was through the theater school. So all of my peers in this program, almost all of them wanted to move to New York in pursuit of Broadway and the stage. Some wanted to go to LA, but I I was in a 5-year program while I was at Northwestern. So I was unable to move to New York right away. I had to stay in
Mhm.
school. And my heart sort of was just like longing to do what all my friends were doing, was like going to New York. And then I finished my program and I decided to get my master's in vocal performance. So I went out to San Francisco and I was out there for 3 years. But the whole time it was with the intention that I was going to move to New York as soon as I was finished.
Mhm.
So it was always a part of the plan. I just wanted to be in the center of it. I wanted to be in the heart of our nation's art scene. So I moved in
Mhm.
2012. And then very soon after, a colleague of mine from San Francisco, Lloyd Areola, who has since passed away, he was living
Oh.
in New York. And I met up with him for coaching right when I got there. And he told me about National Chorale. And at the time, the founder, Martin Josman, was living. And he said, they're looking for a mezzo. They're having auditions. Let me put in a word. You should audition. I said, great. I'm new to the city. I need something to do.
Mhm.
So I auditioned, and National Chorale was actually my very first job in the city.
Wow. And how long did it take, like the in October 2012, like you moved here, and how long after that you got your first gig at National Chorale? How long did it take?
It was very quick. I don't remember when that first concert was, but it was probably in October or November.
Oh.
So it was very, very quick, but I should also say that it was a single gig.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really, really grateful and lucky to have that happen, but I also faced immense rejection in other
Oh.
ways and in other pursuits. So they're both there, and I think that's all a part of living in New York.
Yes, the rejection is real, guys. Whoever is watching this video, like Gina is an outstanding musician, outstanding singer, beautiful voice, and she's prepared. Like she has the study, she has the training, and she's an American. Like because I always thought that because I am not in America, I'm a Brazilian, I would have even a harder time to get gigs and everything. But it's difficult for everybody. It doesn't matter your background. Like even if you're really prepared, like Gina is, and like myself as well, because I have degrees and all of that. It's really hard for us to make it here because of what Gina said. Like we have a lot of people here. Everybody wants to move here, and we have great talent in the city. Like one thing that is really funny because back in my hometown in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, like my voice coach, she was the only voice coach that has a doctor's degree in voice performance in the entire city. And Rio de Janeiro is like the metropolitan area is like 9 million people, 10 million people, something like that. So it's a big city. It's as big as New York, but and she was the only one. Here in New York City, I have doctors everywhere. Like I know at least five on top of my mind that I've worked with. And in order for you to be a doctor in music, that means you have talent and you have the drive to pursue your career and you study and everything. So it sounds that you're prepared. Like, if you're a doctor, you should be prepared. And here in New York City, everybody's not everybody, but we have a lot of doctors. We have a lot of doctors in music, like people that really know what they are doing. But Gina, tell me one more thing. Like since we are talking about the opportunities in New York City and all of that, sometimes that happens. Like you got one gig, one nice gig, and you sang, and then you stay a couple months or a couple weeks, a couple months without nothing else to do. So in those moments, Gina, like in the moments that you had nothing else to do in terms of paid opportunities, how did you how did you keep improving yourself, like keep studying and practicing your craft in terms of singing and developing your network? Like, did you do something towards your career on that regard, or you are just auditioning everywhere? When you are auditioning, like did you audition for certain places and certain organizations? Tell us about it, like on the downtime between one gig and another. What would you do to make your professional career keep going?
Wow, that is such a loaded question.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. It's
In a
just
good
because I want
way.
to share. Oh, thank you.
In a good way. There's so much.
Mhm.
When I first moved to the city, I had a colleague in San Francisco who had previously lived in New York, and she gave me two recommendations. One was a voice teacher, and the second was essentially an acting teacher. She's a musical theater teacher.
Mhm.
And Andrew Byrne, he is still my voice teacher, and Jen Waldman, she is still my acting coach. And both of these people were really my lifeline in the city. One, I so believe that we have to continue studying our craft. There are seasons of maintenance, there are seasons of training. There's a lot of work we can do on our own, but we also need to check in with outside ears and have a small, trusted team to give us guidance and
Mhm.
feedback. So they help me in terms of studying my craft. Jen Waldman of Jen Waldman Studio also has an extraordinary community of artists. And that's really the number one piece of advice I would give people if they're moving to the city is to find community. Find people who inspire you, people who challenge you, people who can be there for you and support you and encourage you. And having that community really kept me going. It always
Mhm.
gave me new ideas of things to try, of opportunities that were coming up to potentially audition for or throw my name in the hat for. And to be honest, the only auditions that I have successfully had in New York have come through a personal connection, such as the
Mm.
National Chorale one. I have auditioned for a ton of things, but I personally have not had success when I didn't know somebody. And so, really, just getting to know other people in the city is going to help you as an artist, but also as a human.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I agree. So, talking about community, because that resonates with me a lot, because, as a foreigner, and, when I moved to New York City, my English skills were like, I can say some stuff, but I cannot say everything I want to say, and not at the speed I want to say. uh, and it for me was hard to find my community because of the language barrier. Let's put this. I know that that doesn't apply to your case, but did you feel like it was easy or difficult to find? What were the challenges to find your own community in New York City? Like, how long did it take for you to feel like, oh, this is my crowd, this is my people? How long did it take from moving here until you felt like comfortable and being part of the community?
That's a great question. I was lucky in that I found this one community right away. That said, I think it really took a couple of years to
Mhm.
gel, and also not only to rely on that one community, to branch off into other communities. So, meeting the people at National Chorale, meeting the people at Jen Waldman Studio, singing in churches and getting to know the people there. Um, Through my different day jobs, having communities there. You kind of spend that first year just getting your feet wet and getting to know people, and deepening the relationships takes time. And that's when I personally felt like I had true
Mhm.
community.
Awesome, awesome. And you said something about day jobs. You always worked in music for even for the day jobs and everything, or you did something different as well?
So when I first moved to the city, I was a nanny slash tutor slash babysitter to a
Mm-hmm.
family. So
Mm-hmm.
I would gig when I could and I would take my lessons and my classes, but my day job was to work with this family who had three children. And I was taking them to their various activities, picking them up from school, helping them with their homework. And I did that for about 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, I worked at Apple. The Apple store on the Upper East Side on Madison Avenue was opening.
Mm-hmm.
And again, a friend who worked at Apple told me that this new store was coming and they would be hiring. And I worked there for a couple of years. Also around that time, also on Madison Avenue, there is a yoga studio slash spa called Exhale, and I worked at the
Mm-hmm.
front desk and in their boutique. And then through National Chorale, a teaching position opened at the Professional Performing Arts School. And around the same time, a teaching position opened on the voice faculty of the 92nd Street Y. And so that's when I started only working in music. I was either teaching or singing.
And how long did it take, like, for you to be involved in other kinds of jobs, to be fully committed with teaching music? How long did it take?
So it was a pretty abrupt shift for me in that two teaching jobs opened up at the same time, and that
Mhm.
allowed me to transition out of what I was doing. But it was about half of my time in New York was spent doing other things, and then the last half I was teaching exclusively.
Oh, I see. I see. So, you touched on a subject that it's really close to my experience as well, because as professional musicians, we see ourselves working in different positions, like in different careers, because let's be honest, we need to pay the bills, we need to support ourselves, we need to pay for our coaching lessons and all of that stuff, and you need money. And sometimes, because we are mostly gig workers, because we are performers and musicians, sometimes it's kind of challenging to find a steady source of income. And that's why we put ourselves in a situation to work for other companies that are not exactly related to music. So my question to you is, like, do you feel like it's an important skill to have for anybody moving to New York City? Like, for instance, musicians, like professional musicians wanting to move to New York City. Do you feel like they should be open-minded in terms of, you know, getting opportunities elsewhere, like outside of their area of expertise, because of the struggles of life and everything? Do you think like this is something important, and it's something that is relatable to most of the people that come to New York City?
Yes, for sure. And I think there's a lot of different angles to that.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing is just taking your craft, even within music. If you are a singer, if you're a pianist or a composer, I think many of us come to New York with the intention of, I want to be on Broadway. I want to sing at the Met.
Mm-hmm.
And we have this like one goal in mind. And the beauty of New York is there's so much arts and culture that if we open ourselves up to whatever opportunities, I mean, knowing who you are and what aligns with your tastes and your values and your
Mm-hmm.
skills, but if you open yourself up to doing the church jobs, to doing the concerts, to doing the choir work and the cabarets, there's so much more opportunity that way than if you are dead set on just one way of using your craft. And then the same thing with employment and finding work. As artists, we have such incredible transferable skills. Our creativity is a huge asset to many different fields of work. And so, if you can open yourself up to sharing those gifts with people who may not be in the arts field, and if you can open yourself up to learning new skills, that will only help you. Now, I do wish that I had more business smarts, business skills, business education
Mm-hmm.
prior to coming to New York. And that's even something I'm still working on now with my own studio, is just learning how to run a business, because as an artist, you are running the business of you.
Yeah.
Um, and I wish that I learned more about that. And I think that I could have learned more about that had I broadened my horizons instead of being so focused on just being the best singer that I could be.
Awesome, awesome. I understand. So, how would you compare yourself in terms of your professional mindset, like before New York and after New York? Because we are talking about being open to, drive your own business and learning about like the businesses in general and how to present yourself and being open to other sources of income and other opportunities that may not be related or directly relatable to music. How would you compare yourself right before like September 2000 and 2012 to nowadays, to this interview is being recorded in March 2022. So how would you compare your mindset in terms of your professional and your business mindset? How would you compare the two?
I would say that has been the biggest change in these years. It has been an extraordinary shift. And the shift is that when I moved to New York, I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to win the jobs. I wanted to perform. I wanted to be told I was good enough. And I didn't really have a strong sense of self. I thought I did. However, I have done so much work on developing self awareness and developing a way to articulate my values, my tastes, truly knowing what my strengths are, what my skills are, what I bring to the table, and developing a point of view that I can stand confidently in because I know what I offer, as opposed to, you and I could be singing the exact same song and our interpretations would be completely different. But if we can kind of explain why our interpretations are going to be different, then we have the knowledge of who we are. And so when you're going after the jobs, when you are building relationships, you can be so much more intentional and aligned with everything that you do instead of just throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks.
Awesome, awesome. Oh, that resonates with me so much because, I feel like it's really important to know who you are as an artist and as a person, of course. But, when it comes to professional career and professional development, especially in arts, because there are no wrong answers in art, basically. Like, as you said, like your interpretation for an art song could be totally different from mine, and both are valuable in their way. And I felt like now you understand this better because of your experience in New York City. Do you feel like these are more like a yes or no question? Like, do you feel like New York City, your experience in New York City, taught you to be more self-aware of who you are as an artist?
Yes, most definitely. And it was out of necessity just because there are so many people. So if you don't figure out what you uniquely bring to the table, then you're not going to feel fulfilled.
Awesome.
So yeah, it was a process that I really went through. And even, I started, we talked earlier about rejection. I
Mm-hmm.
started doing my own cabarets. I started producing my own shows. I started producing benefit concerts for charity. And I found so much creative fulfillment in that. And I think when I first moved to the city, I thought, well, somebody else has to pay me, somebody else has to hire me. And that's what it's all about. But that's not really what it's all about. It's about sharing your gifts and finding your path.
Wow. Well, another thing that I would like to ask you, based on your experiences and everything, if you don't mind sharing, why you moved back to your home city?
I didn't intend to move back. It
Mm-hmm.
was the week that the pandemic was getting really bad,
Mm-hmm.
and my family was telling me I had to come home. They're like, you come home or we're going to come up and get you, get out of the city. And so I thought I was going home for 2 weeks. I asked my mom, how long should I pack for? And she said, a couple of weeks, just in case you can't go back right away. So I left all my things. And then obviously the pandemic got really bad. And I was fortunate that my lease had expired. So I was month to month in my apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to get out of that without financial repercussions. So it was really a financial decision to stay home for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought that I would move back to the city once everything started opening up again. I was teaching in the high school and we had been remote. And then things were going back to in person, but I still wasn't sure about what was going to happen with the pandemic. And uh, I just decided to stay, at least for now.
Mhm.
And as I mentioned, I've been able to go back and forth for some gigs, which has been wonderful to kind of get my,
Mhm.
my fix of the city. Um, but yeah, I don't know. There are different seasons of life. And I think that's something else that I've learned is that I used to think that you had to be in New York if you wanted to be a serious artist, if you wanted to make it, whatever that means.
Mhm.
And I am so grateful for that experience and I love the city. And I'm also learning that there are no absolutes. There's no you must, you have to, never, you should.
Mhm.
It's really about finding what lights you up, what aligns with your lifestyle and the way that you want to live your precious time on this earth.
Mhm.
Maybe that's New York, and maybe that is a house in the suburbs where you can get in and out of Trader Joe's in 30 minutes, you know?
That's amazing. Oh my goodness. So relatable. So relatable. Would you consider coming back to New York City in the future to live here?
Yes.
And would you consider that?
Yes, absolutely. And, when I was nannying in the city, this family that I worked for, whom I adored, they
Mhm.
also had a home in the country. And I discovered that a lot of families in New York have second homes. They would
Mhm.
have a place in the city and then a place in Connecticut or in upstate New York or in the Poconos. And I think in my dream life, I would have something similar where I am either having keeping an apartment in the city and having a house elsewhere, or perhaps just living a bit outside of the city and then commuting in. Just having, that option to have some more quiet and space or to be right in the center of it. So, you
Awesome.
know,
Awesome.
dreams.
Oh yeah, of course, of course. We can dream because dreams are for free, right? We don't pay
Yes.
anything for dreaming. Another question that I have, in your opinion, what would you suggest? Like, what would be your advice for people that never lived in New York City before, but they have plans to move here and they have plans to put themselves out there here in New York City and try to make a living here. Of course, we are talking more about musicians. So I would like to hear from you. What would be something that you suggest that people should be ready for when they consider moving to New York City?
Okay, my first thought is to visit first. Make sure
Mm,
you like the city. It has an energy and a vibe that is all its own. And to make such a huge move without ever having visited, I think people might be in for some major shock. Even having visited, it still can be
mhm,
overwhelming. But make sure you like the city. And then something that we already talked about is knowing who you are
mhm,
and really doing that work on yourself to make sure that you are intentional when you move to the city. You're intentional about the opportunities you're going after, the relationships that you want to build, just knowing what you bring to the table, because there are so many people in the city that if you don't know, you're going to get lost.
yeah.
And then financially, we talked about day jobs and earning money. Have a plan. Now, full disclosure, I did not have a plan. I moved to the city and I was like, well, I will just figure it out. And as artists, we do tend to be resourceful and we can make things happen. But it's so important that you think of your life wholly in its totality instead of only focusing on your craft. And that's something that throughout my life, I can become very, very focused on my art and my craft, and then ignore my health, ignore my relationships,
Mhm,
ignore other aspects of being a full human. And so I think it's really important to just think ahead and sort of have a plan in place for how you're going to balance out your whole
Mhm.
life.
Awesome, awesome. Oh my, guys, are you listening to this? This is really valuable information because, Gina, besides being a great musician, beautiful voice, she is giving us like some opportunity to learn about people that had that experience in moving here, moving out of here, and just like she's telling us, let's pretend that you have a podcast or you have a platform that can reach every human in the face of the earth. And there are no language barriers, and you have the opportunity to say something that everybody will hear. What would you say? What would be your message to the entire world? Feel free, like you can talk about anything you want. It doesn't need to be related to music. But what would you like to say to everybody? Like, a piece of advice or a feeling that you have. Like, what would be an idea or a message that you'd like to share with the whole world?
Well, I do have a podcast, and it's called The Practice Parlor. And it's about the practices that shape artists' lives on stage and off. And so that's sort of the lens through which I'm answering this question, because I like to think of our art and our lives as not being separate. So my answer to your question is your voice matters.
Wow, wow. Oh, guys, listen to this. Your voice matters. So the link for Gina's podcast will be on the description of this video as well. And I'm gonna check it out because I didn't know you had a podcast. Oh my goodness, I need to learn more about you. Oh, I'm so ashamed at this point. But
No, don't be.
Gina, oh, thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you so much for your availability, your honesty in terms of sharing your experiences. I believe we are helping the community at large when we do that kind of stuff because we are just talking. And I'm not pretending to be like the guy that knows everything, and I'm pretty sure you're not putting yourself in this situation either. So we are just two human beings. We had like connections through National Chorale, through my EP, and I really appreciate that you put yourself, like, you gave some time for us to meet and have this amazing conversation. Guys, if you're watching this, I'm glad that you're watching us. And as I said, you're gonna go to the links on the description and you're gonna see some Gina's works. I'm gonna put a link for her website and a link for her podcast. Gina, is anything else that you would like to share in terms of upcoming projects that you're working on, or anything else besides the podcast and your website?
Sure. So at the end of April, I don't know when this airs, but National Chorale will be doing a Mozart Requiem. So hopefully information will be on their website shortly about that. And I am singing with the Mendelssohn Choir here in Pittsburgh and loving that. And I will also just share that if you go to my website, I have a free workbook. It's called 12 Essential Practices for Thriving in Life and Art. And it's a journaling workbook, and it gives you questions and activities to do to develop greater self awareness, to work through different practices that are part of being an artist, practices of reaching out, practices of studying your craft, practices of faith, not necessarily in a religious way, but just having faith in yourself and in what you do. So I encourage you to check that out if you are wanting to do some of that inner work.
Awesome, awesome. Gina, once again, thank you so much for being here. Guys, our beautiful audience, thank you so much for watching this video. And we're going to see you next time, okay? Thank you so much, Gina.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
Thank you. Bye bye.
No